It's really easy for people to be apathetic towards sleep. If you tell your boss that you didn't sleep well last night and you're really tired, he'll probably tell you to go drink some coffee and get back to work. But that's the reality that most people are facing. Out of all the developed nations across the world, 2/3 of adults are failing to get the recommended 8 hours of sleep a night. Now, that number might not surprise you, but what exactly is that lack of sleep doing to your body? If you're regularly sleeping less than 6 to 7 hours a night, it will destroy your immune system. And this will more than double your risk of getting cancer and potentially be the difference of whether or not you get Alzheimer's. And there's even studies showing that just 1 week of not sleeping that well can turn you from being a healthy person into a pre-diabetic. And this is because of how it affects your blood sugar levels. And short sleep will actually put you at a higher risk for getting heart disease because it increases the likelihood that your arteries can get more blocked and more brittle. And there's also a ton of evidence that sleep loss is a big contributor to psychiatric conditions, including depression, anxiety, and even suicide. In fact, there's not a single psychiatric condition where sleep loss is not a factor. It's no coincidence that the countries with the lowest amount of sleep, that's the US, UK, Japan, South Korea, a few other countries, but those are the countries that have the greatest amount of physical diseases and mental disorders. Now, I can keep going, but I think you get the point that sleep is important. And the less that you sleep, the lower your quality of life will be. And not just that, the lower your lifespan will be. Now, we're going to get more into detail on what sleep loss is actually doing to your body, so make sure you stick around. The problem here is even though sleep is important, people still don't take it seriously. I mean, how many times have you heard someone say, "Oh, I'll sleep when I'm dead. I got to do my work now." Or how many times have you heard someone say that they can get by just fine on 4 hours of sleep a night? I've heard that a ton of times, and I can tell you right now that that is absolutely not true. And we have a ton of research showing that not a single person can survive and function to their optimal level on just 4 hours of sleep a night. Human beings are the only animal that routinely neglects their sleep. Now, sometimes this can be unavoidable, right? If you have a job that you work weird hours and you have to take care of kids, that can be kind of hard. Or if you have multiple jobs where you work in the middle of the night, it can be hard to have a normal sleep schedule. But I think the question, can you get by on less than 8 hours of sleep? I think you have to take a step back. And first we have to answer, why do we need sleep in the first place? So first of all, sleep is not a negotiable thing. We need sleep, period. And there's actually evidence that if we do not sleep, it can directly kill us. So there's a rare genetic disorder that people can get. It's called fatal familial insomnia. Basically, this disorder starts off as insomnia, so people have trouble falling asleep. But over time, after a few months, the person will stop sleeping entirely. At this point, this person will lose all basic brain functions. And after about 12 to 18 months, the person will die. There is no treatment, there is no cure, and it's 100% fatal after 18 months. Luckily, this is a very rare disorder and a very extreme example of sleep loss, but we have proof now that a lack of sleep can kill you. Now, the second reason that sleep is not negotiable is evolution would not allow it if it was negotiable. No matter how you look at it or what angle you look at it, sleep can be seen as a waste of time. You're lying there still, not doing anything for 8 hours in the night. So throughout evolution, this was a great time for us to be attacked by predators or people to steal our food, etc. So if you look at it from this lens, sleep should have been weeded out throughout all the years of evolution. Now, this is exactly what evolution and natural selection are doing, because evolution will put a lot of pressure to weed out things that do not promote survival. So if sleep was not helping us, then throughout evolution, it would have weeded it out. But throughout all of evolution, sleep persisted. And not just in humans. Literally every single animal sleeps in one way or another. Some animals will sleep a little differently than humans, but they're still sleeping. So for example, dolphins sleep, but they can actually sleep with just half their brain at a time. So if they're in the water and they need to maintain their aquatic movements to survive, because if they don't have their aquatic movements, they'll die, they can actually turn off half their brain and put half their brain to sleep, but use the other half of their brain to keep themselves awake so that they can maintain movements and survive. And then after the one half of their brain sleeps, they can put the other half of their brain to sleep. Now, this is just one example, and dolphins are still capable of sleeping with both halves of their brain. They just have this unique ability Unfortunately, humans do not have this ability. But the point is that all animals need to sleep. Now, the next thing you need to understand with sleep is it's not a waste of time. Actually, it's providing you with a ton of health benefits. So instead of viewing sleep as this time waster that you need to get done, actually, you should view it as a prescription, basically a prescription prescribed by your doctor so that you can function normally the next day. One of the biggest problems with modern day healthcare right now is the lack of focus on sleep. We talk a lot about diet and exercise and different lifestyles, but we hardly ever talk about sleep. And specifically, the information has not been conveyed to the public. The information on what can happen to your body with sleep loss has not been conveyed to us. And this is information that we have a ton of evidence on and a ton of research on that shows what happens to our bodies, what happens to our brains, and how much danger it can cause, not just to us, but to other people. I was even on the World Health Organization website, and I was just looking at all of their health resources. And I saw a ton of information on health, but I didn't see a single article about sleep. So in this podcast, we're going to talk about how sleep exactly works and a lot of the benefits that we get from sleep. I'm also going to talk about what happens when we don't get enough sleep and how much sleep we actually need. So the first thing we got to understand is what drives us to sleep in the first place. How does your body know when it's time to sleep? I'll give you a hint. It has more to do than just whether it's light or dark outside. There are two main things that determine whether you are going to be awake or asleep. The first is your body's internal clock, and the second is your body's sleep pressure. The combination of these two things are what make you sleepy at night. Your body's internal clock is called the circadian rhythm. Now, every living creature has its own living cycle, and in the brain, it's dependent on the suprachiasmatic nucleus. Now, this is our body's 24-hour clock, and this part of our brain will send messages to the rest of our body and the rest of our organs. And this will also help convey to our body when it's time to go to sleep and when it's time to wake up. Now, our internal clock controls a lot of other things in our body as well. It also controls our body temperature, our mood and our emotions. It also controls our eating and drinking habit. It also controls our metabolism, our blood pressure, controls a ton of things in our body. Now, a lot of times what we've heard is that our circadian rhythm will depend on light. And dependent on this light, it will determine whether we're going to go to sleep or whether we're going to be awake. Now, that's partly true, but what if you do not have any light exposure? Well, we have proof that without any light exposure, your body will still continue on this 24-hour rhythm. There was a study done in 1938 by a University of Chicago professor named Nathaniel Kleitman, and he did this study along with his assistant, Bruce Richardson. They went to a place called Mammoth Cave in Kentucky. Now, this place is really cool because, it's one of the deepest caves in the entire world. And at the deepest portion of this cave, no detectable light can reach it. So what their goal in this study was, they wanted to go in for 6 weeks, and they went with these hospital beds, and they went with enough food and water to last that amount of time. And they wanted to see if their sleep-wake cycles were going to be consistent or if their sleep-wake cycles were going to get out of whack because they had no light to tell them when it was time to go to sleep and time to wake up. And on top of measuring their sleep, they were also measuring their body temperature as well. So they ended up only lasting about 32 days in the cave. Now, that's still a lot more than I would have lasted, but they found some interesting results. They found that humans will still generate their own internal clock without any light. So they found that they will consistently sleep for 9 hours a night and be awake for 15 hours in a day. So this study proved that your body will still have its own cycles regardless of any light exposure. But everything will change in the presence of light. Once you add sunlight to the mixture, then your body will sort of reset in accordance with the sunlight. Or in other words, your body will use the sunlight to reset its own clock. Now, the reason that your body can generate its own circadian rhythm without light is your body can use other cues as well. It can use food, it can use when you're exercising, etc. But the body prefers to use light. So a lot of different things are going to be going on in your body throughout the day. Now, specifically when it's time to go to sleep, there are some specific things that change in your body. And one of them is your body temperature. If you look at a temperature graph throughout the day, you'll see that your temperature will go up throughout the day until the evening time. And then after that time, your temperature will start to go down until you're about to go to sleep. And actually, your temperature reaches its lowest point about 2 hours into your sleep. Now, the cool thing about this is a drop in temperature will actually help signal your body to go to sleep. So one way you can do this is by going to the sauna or taking a hot shower or going in a hot tub before you go to sleep. Because what's happening is you have this warm temperature initially by being in the sauna, and then once you get in that cool bed with those cool sheets, then your body will start to drop in its body temperature. And that drop in body temperature will help signal the body that it's time to go to sleep. Now, ideally, your bedroom should be cool as well. So you want to make sure your bedroom is cool and also your bed or your mattress is cool. And they actually have mattresses that will stay cool. Now, your body temperature is just one of the many different rhythms that go on in your body. And the way that your brain communicates with the rest of your body and coordinates all of these rhythms is through a hormone called melatonin. Now, melatonin is released throughout the day, and it's released more so in response to darkness, or in other words, absence of light. And melatonin will peak in the evening time or close to when it's time for you to go to sleep. This is also why some people take melatonin pills to help them go to sleep. Now, the thing to understand with melatonin is it doesn't actually put you to sleep. It's more of an alarm that signals to your body that it's time to sleep, but it doesn't actually do the act of putting you to sleep. So regardless of whether or not you're sleeping, your body will lose this melatonin, or the concentration of melatonin will go down throughout the night until the morning. And once the morning comes, then your body is basically absent of melatonin. And now this is another signal to your body that in the absence of melatonin, that it's time for you to wake up because it's not sleep time anymore. Now, this is also why people experience jet lag. So normally when our ancestors had to travel really far distances, it would take them multiple days. So for example, if I had to go from Michigan to California, walking that journey would take me a long, long time. And that time difference of 3 hours, I wouldn't even notice it because the amount of days that it took to get there, it would make up for that difference. Basically, my body would adjust to the time zone because of how slow I'm going. But now we have airplanes, which one, I'm really thankful for. But we can get to our areas really fast now. So now, instead of a journey taking us multiple days, now we can travel across the world in just one day. But this will really throw off our circadian rhythm. And this is why it's called jet lag, because you're traveling in a jet. So now what happens is when you travel halfway across the world, your body still thinks it's in the original time zone, even though you just jumped to a completely different time zone. So for example, my parents are from a state in India called Punjab. Now, anytime we had to travel to India, this would take almost a whole day of traveling. But India is almost a 10-hour time difference from where we are. So that means that once we get there, we are, one, really tired from the whole journey to get there, but also we feel jet lagged because when it's daytime there, our body still thinks that it's nighttime here. Or the opposite happens. If it's nighttime there, then we're going to be wide awake because our body thinks it's daytime over here. Now, you might think that our body will adjust to this light exposure and see that now that it's dark outside, that our body should just adapt and reset. Well, that will happen, but it happens a lot slower than you'll think. So our body can only adjust about 1 hour a day. So in other words, the internal clock in our brain can only adjust 1 hour a day. So if we travel somewhere that has an 8-hour time difference, our brain will take 8 days to adjust to that 8-hour time difference. Now, unfortunately, a lot of times what happens is by the time that our brain adjusts to that time difference, we have to come back because when we went to India, we'd only go for like 2 weeks. And it would take a day to get there and a day to come back. So the whole 10 days that we really have in India, once our brain is finally adjusted to the India time zone, now it's time to come all the way back. And now we have to readjust to the different time zone here again. Now, this is part of the reason why people take melatonin pills when they're traveling, especially for far distances. Like, for example, if I were to go to India and it were to be nighttime in India and I want to make sure I reset my cycle, I can take a melatonin pill around nighttime there so that it'll help me go to sleep, and then my body will help readjust to the new cycle. Now, personally, I've never taken melatonin before, and I don't plan on taking it anytime soon, but I can definitely see the use of it, especially when you're traveling. Now, the second thing that determines whether or not your body's going to go to sleep is your sleep pressure. Now, your sleep pressure is completely independent of your circadian rhythm. So no matter what happens, your sleep pressure will build up throughout the day. Now, this is called your adenosine, And this is a molecule that builds up the longer you are awake. So again, the only thing that your adenosine depends on is how long you've been awake. It has nothing to do with your melatonin and your circadian rhythm. And I'm going to get into why that's super important in just a second. But basically, the way this works is throughout the day, this adenosine will build up because you've been awake. And the longer you are awake, the more this adenosine will build up and the more this will make you sleepy. In other words, the more sleep pressure this will put on you. Again, it's not going to put you to sleep. It's just going to make you more sleepy. And it does this specifically by turning down certain awake-promoting regions in your brain and turning up more sleep-promoting regions in your brain. So when our adenosine peaks at nighttime, we have a really strong urge to sleep. And usually on a typical day, our adenosine will peak after about 12 to 16 hours of being awake. But now if you combine this with our melatonin, then it's going to make us even more sleepy because the melatonin will be acting from one end and the melatonin will peak at nighttime and then our adenosine will peak because we've been awake all day. Now, ideally, this will help us really go to sleep and get a quality 8 hours of sleep at night. Now, your adenosine is also what caffeine affects. So this is the reason why people drink coffee, because caffeine will block your adenosine receptors in your brain. So basically, your adenosine in your brain will be building up, but your brain won't even recognize it because this caffeine will be blocking it. So caffeine isn't really waking you up. It's basically preventing you from getting more tired. Now, one of the problems with caffeine is it has a very long half-life. So let's say you drink a cup of coffee around the evening time. So you're with your dinner, for example, at 6 p.m., you have a full cup of coffee. Well, your coffee, or caffeine specifically, has a half-life of about 6 hours. So that means 6 hours after you had your dinner, that half of this caffeine is going to be in your system. So now when you're trying to sleep at midnight, you still have half of that caffeine in your system and your adenosine or your sleep pressure in your body is still being blocked. You might think that that's a very little amount of caffeine that's still left in your body, but even a little amount of caffeine in your body can really throw off your sleep. And not just throw off your sleep, also really affect your sleep quality. So not only is it going to make it harder for you to fall asleep because you don't have as much sleep pressure. Even if you do fall asleep, you're not getting as much of your deep sleep and you're not going to be as well rested in the morning. And there's even studies showing that you're going to be more reliant on the coffee the next day. Now, your ability to get rid of caffeine also depends on your age. So as you get more older, you're going to be more sensitive to caffeine because it's going to be harder for your body to get rid of this caffeine. Now, very few people actually do not have to worry about coffee because some people, they have these bodies that are very efficient in removing caffeine from their system. So they don't have that very high half-life that most people do. Instead, they can drink a cup of coffee at nighttime and then go to sleep shortly after and not have any problem. But if you think that you're lucky enough to have this, just know that it's very, very rare. And you'd have to take a genetic test to see if you have that gene that helps break down coffee a lot faster. Now, the other problem with coffee or caffeine is the caffeine crash that you get. So the reason that you get that caffeine crash is because when you have this caffeine in your system, again, you're blocking those adenosine receptors. So meaning that adenosine is not reaching your brain and your brain is not reacting to that adenosine molecule that's building up. But it doesn't stop the adenosine molecule from building up. So more and more of that adenosine is building up in your brain. So eventually, once that caffeine leaves those adenosine receptors, you get flooded with all these adenosine molecules that affect your adenosine receptors. So basically, you get flooded with all this sleep pressure at once. So you go from not feeling sleepy to feeling super sleepy all at once. That's why you get that caffeine crash. So what do people do in this scenario? They either drink more caffeine or they just deal with that sleepiness. If you drink more caffeine, then it's probably going to be a bad idea because we've seen that it can really disrupt your sleep. So it'd be probably better to just deal with it and get good quality sleep in the first place and not have to rely on as much caffeine. So this is exactly how our sleep works. And this is exactly what helps drive us to go to sleep. On one end, we have our melatonin, or again, our body's internal clock. And once it senses more and more darkness, it'll build up throughout the day and peak at nighttime. And then on the other end, we have our adenosine, which is the sleep pressure completely independent of our melatonin. And this is going to build up more and more. And both of these things are going to combine to signal us to go to sleep and help us go to sleep. So again, remember I told you that these are independent. So one example of that is, let's say you're pulling an all-nighter. And I'm sure a lot of you have pulled all-nighters in the past. I've pulled all-nighters a lot in college when I was studying for exams, and back then I didn't care that much about my sleep, and a lot of people in college did not care about their sleep. But what you notice when you pull an all-nighter is you have phases where you get really, really tired, but then you also have phases where you don't feel as tired. And the reason for that is, again, this sleep pressure and our body's internal clock are independent. So your melatonin, again, will peak at nighttime. But throughout the night, your body will get rid of more and more of this melatonin, and your melatonin concentration will go down and down. So what happens is by the morning time, you don't have any more melatonin, and you don't have that signal for your body to go to sleep anymore. And also the sun is rising, but you still have all that sleep pressure. So even though that you have this melatonin and adenosine building up at nighttime, and your sleepiness is going to be peak around that time, if you keep waiting and push through that, then you're going to get a second wind. And this is what happens when people pull all-nighters, where they feel like, oh, wow, I feel great, even though I didn't sleep last night. But the problem is that your adenosine or your sleep pressure will keep building up more and more throughout the day. And this is really not sustainable for a long period of time. I'm sure whoever of you have tried to stay up as long as possible, you can see that this is not sustainable. And I don't recommend any of you guys trying this. So what happens is, over time, you're going to get this sleep debt because, again, your adenosine doesn't stop building up. It only depends on one thing, how long you've been awake. And if you've been awake all night long, your adenosine is going to keep building up more and more throughout the day and throughout the night. So that if you manage to make it to the next night where you're going to go to sleep, you're going to have an abundance of this sleep pressure. And this is when people sleep longer than what they normally would. Because naturally, when you have more sleep pressure, you have to sleep more to sleep it off. It's kind of like a loan. A loan never goes away. And if you don't pay it off, then it's going to accrue interest, and then you have to pay more of it off. It never really goes away. You have to pay it off eventually. It's the same thing with your sleep. But the difference with your sleep is you can never really sleep off the loss of sleep that you got. So for example, a recovery night for most people is like 10 to 12 hours of sleeping, compared to the typical 8 hours of sleep what we're supposed to get. But if you're awake for 24 hours straight, then you're still missing out on 4 to 6 hours of sleep extra that you would normally get. A typical week of work for a lot of people is you work Monday through Friday or Monday through Thursday, whatever your schedule is, and you have all this sleep loss throughout the week because you never really sleep as much as you want. You always have to rely on your alarm, and you're never able to sleep in. And then once the weekend comes, you can finally recover from all that sleep loss that you had, and you can sleep in again. And this is a typical cycle that most people do for their whole life. But this is a huge misconception. You can never pay off that sleep debt with a good night of recovery sleep. If you base it on the studies, we can never make up for that sleep loss that we accrued. Every day that you do not sleep enough, your body will accrue more and more of this sleep debt. Or in other words, more and more of this adenosine molecule. Again, your adenosine molecule is your body's sleep pressure. So the more that you are awake, the more this adenosine molecule will build up, and the more sleepy you will feel. So if you sleep 6 hours a night when you're supposed to sleep 8 hours a night, then your body will still have 2 hours of this adenosine pressure still there. And then the next night, if you do the same thing, you're going to accrue more of this adenosine. And then it's going to build up more and more and more. So if you just try to sleep it off on the weekend, let's say throughout the week, you're sleeping 6 hours a night. So you're working Monday through Thursday. Each day, you're only sleeping 6 hours, and then you try to recover on the weekends. But on the weekends, you're only sleeping about 9 hours. So I'm even giving you one extra day on the weekend. I'm giving you a long weekend. I'm giving you Friday, Saturday, and Sunday to sleep in. And you're sleeping 9 hours on Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. So you're sleeping a total of 3 extra hours on those 3 days. But Monday through Thursday, you only slept 6 hours. So each day, you slept 2 hours less than you're supposed to. So that is a total of 8 hours of sleep that you missed out on. So you're missing out on 8 hours of sleep, and you're only paying it back with 3 hours of recovery sleep on the weekends. And this is a huge misconception that a lot of people have. A lot of people think they can simply make up for their week of not sleeping enough by just recovering on the weekends. But we have a lot of evidence, and I have studies that I'm going to show you that prove that you cannot make up this lack of sleep, and your concentration will go down and a lot of other problems will happen. But the sad part is that this is a reality that a lot of people are facing. Most people view work this way, where they have to rely on an alarm clock. If you rely on an alarm clock to wake up, then that's another sign that you're not sleeping enough, because without that alarm clock, you would have kept sleeping. And what happens is, over time, when you constantly have this sleep debt that keeps building up, then you're going to be chronically fatigued, because this adenosine molecule will constantly be hanging around in your body, constantly be telling you that you're sleepy, and you're never going to recover. Now, this might be surprising, but hardly anyone can function at their peak without getting at least 8 hours of sleep in a night. And we have studies that show that if you sleep just 6 hours for 10 days straight, that you're going to be as cognitively impaired as someone who was awake for 24 hours straight. So there was a lot of sleep research done by a guy named David Dinges, and he is a sleep researcher at the University of Pennsylvania. His main question was, how long can humans go, or how long can humans be awake before they start getting cognitively impaired? And his last question he had, this is my favorite part, is how many nights of recovery sleep do people need after a period of sleep deprivation? Or basically, how many nights of recovery sleep do people need to make up for sleep loss? So his study was actually really simple, and it was basically a study of people's reaction time. And this is called the psychomotor vigilance test, or basically PVT for short. So the people in this study were asked to stare at a computer screen and respond to flashes of light. So every time they see a flash of light on the computer, they have to push a button. So the study would only last 10 minutes every day. And this flash of light would come in random succession. So sometimes these flashes of light would be back to back, and sometimes it would take up to 10 seconds before the next flash of light came. And the two things that he was measuring was how long it took you to respond, and also whether or not you would respond in the first place. So in this study, he had 4 different groups. So all of them had a baseline measure where they had a full night of 8 hours of sleep where they could rest normally and then take the test. And then there was 4 different groups split up. So the lucky group was the group that got to sleep 8 hours every single night. And then the other groups weren't so lucky. So one of the groups was kept awake for 72 hours straight. And one of the groups only got to sleep 4 hours a night. And the last group only got to sleep 6 hours a night. So the first thing that he found is no matter which group you were in, sleep deprivation caused a general slowing in people's reaction times. But the most interesting thing he found is people would stop responding at times completely. So they would go with these brief periods where they would just stop responding. And these are called microsleeps. So the real life equivalent of a microsleep is when someone is driving and they don't respond to a life or death situation where someone slams the brakes in front of them or someone runs in front of their car and they don't react in time. So a microsleep is when your brain becomes temporarily unaware of all of its surroundings. And what happens during a microsleep is your body can lose control of all of its motor functions, including if you're driving a car. So you can imagine that if you're driving a car and even for a couple seconds, your body's not able to respond to something, a lot of damage can be done. Every hour in the United States, someone dies in a traffic accident because they were too tired. So going back to the study, unsurprisingly, the group that slept 8 hours a night was the most stable, and they had the fewest errors, and they had the best reaction time. And also not surprising is the group that pulled all-nighters had the worst reaction time, and they had the worst impairment. So after just one night of not sleeping, their missed responses or their microsleeps went up by 400%. Now, the interesting thing here is after the second and third night of not sleeping, their missed responses kept increasing at the same rate, and there was no sign of this plateauing whatsoever. And there were similar measures seen in the other groups, in the 4-hour and the 6-hour group as well. What they found in the 4-hour a night group is after just 6 days of sleeping 4 hours a night, they were as cognitively impaired as someone who pulled an all-nighter. So they had the same 400% increase in missed responses. And again, this showed no signs of plateauing or slowing down. Instead, it just kept increasing at the same rate and actually exponentially getting worse. And actually, by the 11th day in the study, this group that was sleeping just 4 hours a night had the same impairment as someone who was pulling 2 all-nighters in a row. Now, I think the most interesting thing here lies in the 6-hour impairment group. After just 10 days of sleeping 6 hours a night, which most people think is a healthy amount of sleep, after just 10 days, they had the equivalent cognitive impairment as someone who pulled an all-nighter. And again, this only exponentially got worse. This was only 10 days, and this showed no sign of plateauing. It only showed signs of getting worse. Now, this gets really scary when you think about people in high school or other schooling, because they routinely neglect their sleep. For example, when I was in high school, I only slept about 4 hours a night. And if I ever got to sleep longer than 4 hours, I would view this as a big reward. Like 6 hours of sleep was a ton to me. Next time you're at work, you can ask people around you how long they think that they sleep a night, or you can assess how long you think you sleep a night. And you'll find that most people will sleep less than 8 hours a night. And the thing is that other studies have showed similar results as well. Other studies have varied the sleep times a little bit. Some studies have even gone up to a 7-hour sleeping group. And these studies have consistently found that no matter what, if you sleep less than 8 hours a night, that you will consistently lower your cognitive ability and you will increase your cognitive impairment. And the longer that you keep the sleep deprivation up, the more that you will be cognitively impaired and the more exponentially that this will get worse. And the worst part about all of this is people did not realize how sleep deprived they were. Throughout all these studies, the participants were asked how they feel and how impaired that they think that they are. And they would consistently say that they think that they're fine when they weren't. So this is the equivalent of someone who's drunk and telling you that they're fine to drive home. Now, what I think the scariest part of these studies is that your recovery nights of sleep did not return you to normal. Even when these participants were given 3 days of recovery sleep. Now, this is sleep where they could sleep as much as they wanted to. Even after the 3 days, their performance did not return to their baseline levels because the brain is simply not capable of doing that. The brain is not capable of going back to its baseline after periods of sleep deprivation. Now think about most people. Most people are constantly in a state of sleep deprivation where they're never sleeping how much their body actually needs. And they're always relying on their alarm clocks and they're always tired because they're never getting that full night of sleep. Then they try to recover on the weekends or recover even after a week of going on vacation or something. But throughout all the years that you've been working or going to school, etc., all the years that you've been depriving your body of getting enough sleep, you can never make up for that difference. And this is part of the reason why so many people are chronically fatigued, because they have this abundance of sleep deprivation and this abundance of this adenosine or this sleep molecule that's building up and never fully gets to go away because you never fully sleep it off. And this is also why so many people are addicted to caffeine, because your caffeine, again, blocks your adenosine receptors. And basically what your caffeine does is it prevents you from being tired. So although it blocks this adenosine from reaching your brain, eventually that caffeine will wear off. And more of this adenosine will keep building up. And then you're going to rely more and more on this coffee. So this is why I think people should really start focusing on their sleep and start making sleep, specifically getting 8 hours of sleep a night, a priority. One of the scariest things about being sleep deprived is how similar it can be to someone being drunk. So a study was done in Australia, and they were basically looking at 2 different groups. So one of the groups, they basically kept awake, and they wanted to compare after how many hours they kept this person awake to someone who was drunk. So they got the second group drunk to the point of the US legal driving limit. And the way that they tested this was the same concentration test that was done before, where they would look at the responses of light and have to push a button as soon as they see a light. And what they found is after just 19 hours of someone being awake, they are just as impaired as someone who was legally drunk. So if you want to compare this to a real life scenario, someone who wakes up on a Friday at 7 a.m. for work, and then after work, they're ready to go to the bar and go hang out, but they don't want to drink anything, and then they go hang out with their friends until about 2 a.m. That is 19 hours of being awake. But that person is just as impaired as some of his friends who've been drinking. These are the same people that have to DD and drive their friends home, even though they're just as impaired as them. So in the same study, what they found is people's performance started rapidly going down after just 15 hours of being awake. So in that same scenario, it's going to be someone who wakes up at 7 a.m. and then until about 10 p.m. After 10 p.m., then your impairment is going to start rapidly increasing. So just to further show how impaired you can be when you're sleep deprived, there was a study done by AAA, and they were basically seeing the rate of car crashes compared to sleep loss. And they found that just one night of sleeping 4 hours a night, you are 11 and a half times more likely to get in a car crash. Now, the thing with this is this relationship between sleep deprivation and getting in a car crash is not linear. It's not that every hour you sleep less, your risk of getting in a car crash is going to go up this much. It's exponential. So every hour that you accrue of sleep loss, you exponentially get a higher and higher risk of getting in a car crash. And just like all the other studies we've seen, that this shows no sign of plateauing, and it only shows signs of increasing and getting worse. So in the same study, they found that if you sleep between 4 and 5 hours a night, you're going to be still 4.3 times more likely to get in a car crash. Now, we've just been looking at sleep loss. We haven't really looked at what happens with being drunk. Now, imagine someone who is both sleep deprived and also drunk, and the amount of damage that that could cause. Now, luckily, we can test this in a safe way. We don't have to actually get people drunk and get them sleep deprived and tell them to go drive on the roads, because one, that would be illegal, and two, that would be very stupid. We can do this with driving simulators. So researchers did this, and they examined 4 different groups. They examined one group that had 8 hours of sleep and wasn't drinking, so that I call that the lucky group. The second group slept only 4 hours a night and had no alcohol. The third group slept 8 hours a night, but they did get drunk. And the fourth group slept only 4 hours and they also got drunk. So not surprising, the group that slept 8 hours a night and wasn't drinking, they had the least amount of errors and they drove the best. Now the group that slept 4 hours a night but did not drink any alcohol, they had 6 times more off-road deviations than the control group, or the group that slept 8 hours. So basically, off-road deviations are when you're driving and you start steering and leaning towards one side of the road. Now, the third group, the group that slept 8 hours a night but also got drunk, they were just as impaired, or they showed the same amount of errors as the group that slept 4 hours a night. So if you go based on the study, if you sleep 4 hours a night, or if you sleep a normal amount and get drunk, you're going to have the same amount of errors. So if you go based on the study, whether you sleep 4 hours a night or whether you get a full night of sleep and get drunk, it really doesn't make a difference in your ability to drive. Now, the fourth group, the group that slept 4 hours and also got drunk, they were the worst. And again, that's not surprising. But what is surprising is how bad they were. They weren't just a little bit more impaired than the other groups. This group had 30 times more off-road deviations than the original control group. So what that means is when you take this sleep deprivation and you combine it with alcohol, these two effects will multiply each other. They will magnify each other. They won't just add on to each other, because we've seen that the group that was sleep deprived, they had 6 times more deviations. And the group that had enough sleep but they had alcohol, they had also 6 times the amount of deviations. But when you combine the two, instead of just getting 12 deviations, you had 30 times the amount of off-road deviations. So this is what can be really deadly when people get behind the wheel. So now I want to compare this again to a real life scenario that is really unfortunate today. Someone who works a long week at work and doesn't get enough sleep throughout the week. And then the last day, Friday comes, and they go out to the bar and they don't drink a whole lot. They just have one drink, but now they're going to drive home. So now not only are they sleep deprived throughout the week, on that Friday when they're going out, they're also staying up past what they normally would. And combine that with them having a drink or two, and now they have to drive home. That person might not even have a blood alcohol content of being legally drunk, but they're definitely going to be impaired, not just from the sleep loss, but from the combination of alcohol. So no matter what way we look at this, we can conclude that our bodies need sleep. And sleep is not something that is negotiable. And we need to get not just sleep, but we need to get enough sleep. Because we can also take this into real life scenarios in a lot of different professions. We have studies that show that doctors who are sleep deprived make more mistakes. We also have studies that show that athletes who are sleep deprived are more likely to get injured. It's really easy for people to get used to being in this chronic state of this brain fog, or being in this chronic state of being tired, because everyone else around them is in the same state where they're constantly getting sleep deprived and they're constantly relying on their alarm clocks and constantly not getting enough of that sleep that they need so that they think what they're doing is normal. But if you look at the studies and you look at what can happen when you're not sleeping enough, you'll see that it's definitely not normal. And we definitely need to get our 8 hours of sleep a night. Most people think that intermittent fasting is this magic pill and it's going to magically help them lose weight. It's going to magically help them get super fit and get these six-pack abs. And there's a good reason why. A lot of good things can happen when you stop eating. And we have a lot of data that supports this because most people simply eat too much.